We are now recording. Welcome everybody to the last in our three-part series on rewilding with communities. Really excited to be here today. Thank you for joining us. Also a little bit sad that this is the last of the series. Sad times. But hopefully we can talk towards the end of this session about what might happen next. It would be really good to get your thoughts and feedback on that. This session is all about how to rewild like a wild boar. So without further ado, I'm going to share the presentation with you. Helen is kindly offered to help us with the chat. Please do message us at any point, ask us any questions. We'll have some Q&As through the session as well, but Helen can deal with some of those questions, I'm sure, as we go along. I just want to start by kind of saying a big thank you to the people who supported this project as well: Ouse Valley Climate Action, a National Lottery Community Fund, Lewes District Council, and Helen and her team at the Railway Land Wildlife Trust in Lewes, East Sussex. So thank you to all of you for making this webinar a possibility, and I hope it will be really useful for everyone who's participating. So without further ado, let's take a look at the presentation now. Can you all see? Give me a thumbs up if you can see the presentation okay. That is fantastic. Thank you so much. So let's make a start on rewilding like a wild boar. So first of all, just a quick agenda for our plan for the next kind of 56 minutes. First of all, just a brief reminder what this series is about, why we're here today. Secondly, let's talk about wild boar because they're pretty cool animals. We're going to talk about rooting behavior. We're going to talk about wallowing behavior today, which is going to be really fun. We do also have for you, depending on how time goes, we have a bonus track, community rewilding project to talk about. But we may also have a little bit of extra time spare today. So if we do, I would really like us to share some ideas, make this a bit more of a community discussion. Love to know your thoughts on rewilding ideas that you could do with communities. Could be anything, could be species reintroductions, it could be I don't know, just daft ways of replicating some of these ecosystem engineers like we've been testing over the last few weeks. Any ideas you have, so have a think about that now. It'd be lovely to discuss those towards the end, and also what you've got from these workshop series and what you might see as a next step. You know, how might we kind of expand on this program of activities and involve more people? That would be really, really wonderful. So some food for thought there, but first of all, let's talk about boars. Well, before we talk about boars, each time we've ran one of these sessions, we've kind of reflected just a little bit more on rewilding, on nature connection, just kind of set the scene. And for this last one, I thought it would be quite useful to just have a quick look at some of the information that we've gathered as a result of running these webinars. So who's actually interested in community rewilding? So we've just had a look at literally just the email addresses of people who've got involved in the webinars. I mean, I'm very, very pleased to say we set a 100-person limit on these community rewilding webinars. All 3 of them have sold out. They are free, of course, but it's absolutely wonderful that's happened. We had about 160 people participating, so that tells us that lots of people have either got involved or 2 or all 3 of the webinars. Thank you if you are one of those people. And just a couple of graphics here. So the left-hand one, you can see that again, just based on email addresses, so it's not perfect, but about 2/3 of our audience have come from the public, have been, you know, private email addresses and coming from the community. So that's absolutely fantastic. It's what we want. We need more people from our communities getting involved in rewilding. So that's a big tick. But the other third have been organisations or have registered through their work email addresses. And the wildlife trusts have been the kind of the biggest stakeholder, about 38% of that proportion of stakeholders from from a kind of professional interest have come from the Wildlife Trust. So you can wave or send a big thumbs up if you're in the Wildlife Trust right now on this call. Thank you for joining us. And then it's been a kind of fairly even split between a kind of a number of other organisations, really. So National Trust, had quite a lot of interest from National Trust, from statutory bodies like Forestry England and DEFRA, from a range of other smaller nature conservation or community-focused charities, from a whole bunch of national parks across the country, which is great, local government and local councils, from specific rewilding projects as well. So it's really interesting to kind of see that breakdown, and just see how broad it is, really. And I think it's a really encouraging sign for this kind of growing interest in how we really sort of bring people into this wonderful topic of rewilding and renaturing and, hope for nature restoration, really. So I think that's really encouraging. So that's something on interest. I also just wanted to touch very briefly on accessibility. And this is completely anecdotal, so you can kind of take it or leave it, really. But I was giving a talk on community rewilding at a small conference a couple of weeks ago, where people were interested in nature, they were interested in growing food. And I asked, there were about 50 people in the audience, and I asked them to give me a hands up on how accessible they thought rewilding was. And I said, so 10, we're gonna put your hand, you can put your hand up from 10 down to 1, 10 being that rewilding is really accessible, and 1 is that it's completely inaccessible. And so I started counting down. 10, nobody put their hand up. 9, 8, still nobody. 7, 6, nobody. 5, people started putting their hands up. 5 out of 10. That was the best out of that one tiny sample size. So it's like a 50% confidence that rewilding is really accessible to people. 5s and 4s, people started putting their hands up. Most people put their hands up 4 and 3 out of 10. Some 2 and some 1. So, it's meaningless, really. It's tiny sample size, but I'd really recommend that you do this when you are talking to people and audiences, just to get a feel. And it shows how much work we've still got to do. I think it's an encouraging thing, actually, in a way, because it's like there's a job to do here to really connect people to this fantastic movement. But we do really have to push, and we need to innovate. So there's a little bit of background. Be great to get your thoughts on that in the Q&A. This series is about our attempts, Helen and mine attempts, at the Railway Land Nature Reserve in Lewes, East Sussex, to kind of trial our own kind of game playing tests for replicating some of the amazing activities of these kind of incredible animals that we've lost on the landscape, some of these ecosystem engineers like, wild boar, beavers, wolves, for example, by working with our local community to actually get them to kind of replicate some of the activities that these animals do that have a positive impact on biodiversity and nature. And we've tried that over the last couple of years in many different ways with varying success, but we wanted to share some of our success stories with you and hope that you might take them on or come up with your own better ideas, quite frankly. So that's what we've been doing. One of the animals that we've kind of been working with, metaphorically speaking, has been the wild boar. So a little bit on wild boars. They are ecosystem engineers. They change the biodiversity, they change the landscape around them through the activities that they do. Sadly, they became extinct in the UK sometime in the 17th century. They returned in the 1970s, not legally, but through a series of escapes from wild boar farms, basically, which happened through the 1970s and the 1980s. They're now established in a limited number of sites around the UK. Why are they important for the wider ecosystem? Well, one of the things that they do is rooting. They use their noses and they use their hooves to basically dig patches of earth, scatter patches of earth all over the place. They disturb the ground and they aerate the ground, and that turns over the soil, improves water infiltration, offers new opportunities for seed germination, etc. And it creates all these kind of patches of bare ground, allows the dispersal of seeds, provides new food for scavengers or pollinators, creates areas of warm ground, so changes the kind of thermal dynamics of the ground. So it really kind of has a sort of diversifying impact on the ground. The other thing that they do, which is really, really helpful, is they do a lot of wallowing. Pigs and mud are, they go hand in hand. So, and by wallowing, they create these kind of pools or temporary wetlands. And that has its own sort of potential benefits for nature and biodiversity. So, why should we as human beings behave like boars? Well, we can replicate this kind of rooting, which can reduce soil compaction in areas where that's an issue, and add organic matter back into the soil. Leaf litter, for example, can now access the soil layer much more easily. Create this bare ground, which is brilliant for all sorts of wildlife that we've just discussed. And then these wallows as well, with these fantastic, we can create small pools or ephemeral pools, which ephemeral means that they don't last, they're not permanent, they don't last all year long, they dry out, but they have, that in itself is a fantastic value for wildlife. So we can easily kind of replicate the processes that these wild boar do. So let's have a look at the rooting first. Let's have a look at wild boar rooting and how we can replicate that. So I guess the first thing to say is that anyone who's a gardener and has used a spade or a trowel and dug a bed, you'll find that there's a robin that arrives on you put a fork in the ground, there's a robin arrives almost straight away. Well, a robin is the wild boar's friend, really. The robin knows that when the ground has been turned over, there are likely to be worms there. So there's just one example of a species of bird that suddenly gets access to food because something's turned over the ground. And when we use a trowel or a spade to turn over the ground, we're really replicating that process of a wild boar. And what's really great is that we tend to be just taking the kind of upper layer of the soil up and turning it over. We're leaving all the sort of important mycelial connections that are happening at that slightly lower level in the ground, which is so important, for in terms of the sort of organic recycling of matter and just the kind of the maintenance of microorganisms which keep our soil healthy. So the boars are doing this perfect balance of just taking up the top layer of the soil but leaving everything else in place. So we can replicate what they do by using trowels, by using spades. Trowels in particular, if you look at the shape of a trowel, it is basically identical to the trotter of a pig or a wild boar. I'm not sure about the ethics of this, but you can actually buy wild boar trotters on the internet. They're sold, I presume it's a byproduct of pig farms, but they're sold for as dog chews. But if you have a look at one and then put it next to a trowel, it is literally identical, the shape. So you can see that these two things work very, very much in the same way. So let's have a look at what would we do if we wanted to root around like a wild boar? Well, as with any exercise, first of all, we need to choose a site. So we might choose an area where soil disturbance might have a benefit for biodiversity. So lawns and grassy patches where turfs could be allowed to be lifted. So at the edge of parks, for example. Overgrown or areas of compacted soils in gardens, parks or nature reserves. Spaces where you might want to create patches of wildflower meadow, habitat creation, or woodland edge, which is the habitat that wild boars kind of thrive in the most, really. And then we need to think about tools, which we've already talked. So, just using typical gardening tools, really. So forks, mattocks, spades, trowels, anything that kind of allows us to dig up the earth in little patches, sporadic patches, random patches, really. And we want to randomly lift and turn those small patches over, mimicking this kind of uneven scattering patterns. And so we get this kind of mixture of exposed soil and overtone turfs. And as soon as you do it, you can kind of already kind of see the benefits, all the things that could hide under that overturned turf, which is now a dark and moist place. So fantastic for amphibians, brilliant for invertebrates. But then the open pieces of soil that are left, they will warm up at 5 degrees higher temperature than the surrounding grassland. So if you're a reptile, if you're a butterfly that needs to sunbathe, these are the places that are really going to benefit. And then just kind of thinking about the size and scale of this kind of rooting activity. So we typically, when you see wild boar out in the wild, you see these kind of turfs being turned over. It depends. They can be quite linear along paths, for example. But, choosing an area kind of 1 to 2 square meters would be a good way to start. Depends on how big your site is, of course. But you can expand upon that. You can experiment with that as you go. When to actually do it? Well, we recommend, late autumn or early spring to kind of align with the natural cycles of seed dispersion and growth and regeneration. Of course, to be honest, the boars do it all year round, so you might want to follow the boars' lead. There are certain times of preference because they do a lot of looking for fungi, a lot of looking for bulbs and shoots, for example. And then just thinking about avoiding times where you might disturb, for example, ground nesting birds or other wildlife in the nesting season. You could also kind of use this boar rootling as an opportunity to kind of further enhance the habitat. So you can kind of seed bomb the locations. We've tried to do that. So you can see where the sort of orange sand is in these little boar patches that we've created here at the Railway Land Reserve. And that's got some woodland glade, woodland edge, wildflower and grass seed mix in. You could even think about, fungal spores that you could introduce to some of these places. Giant puffball, for example, is a good one in areas of nettles like this. It's also an edible. So there are things that you could do to kind of supercharge that wildlife regeneration, or, as is the sort of rewilding mantra, just literally leave it be and see what happens. And then there's the kind of monitoring and the maintenance of these patches. Is there a benefit to biodiversity? So, monitoring the kind of soil moisture, ensuring the conditions are good for germination. If we go through a very hot and dry spell, for example, observing changes in activity. What species thrive in these rootled areas. What insect activity? What are the benefits for soil health? What are your plans for sort of repeating the rooting activities seasonally or across different spaces? And then just thinking about kind of adjusting techniques based on observed results, really, such as increasing patch size and frequency. And then there's the whole kind of community engagement side of this. I mean, we've found that with many of these projects, children, give them a trowel and get them digging. They absolutely love it. Adults have got really stuck in as well, as you've seen some of those images. So hosting a kind of root like a wild boar day, involving volunteers in that kind of hands-on rewilding and explaining the importance of the value of this kind of work. Sharing this kind of science behind the wild boar's role as an ecosystem engineer, and then just maybe encouraging people to kind of actually monitor these areas. What are the benefits for nature and biodiversity? At the Nep estate where they've reintroduced Tamworth pigs, the belief there is that that's had a massive impact on the recovery of purple emperor butterflies, because the sallow had new opportunities in these rootled areas to get growing again. And it's been fantastic for the turtle dove population, which has bounced back because lots of annual high energy seed producing plants have taken root in these rootled areas. So we can see that there are some massive benefits of this approach. So that is the first of our 2 main projects that we're talking about with boars. Let me just stop presenting for a minute. Would be lovely to have any comments on that. Anybody who feels that they might replicate that or has tried something similar. Any thoughts or observations? All good. Helen. James just enjoyed it. That's good to hear. Thanks, James. Thank you, James. Helen, do you have any comments on the kind of boar activity on the reserve?
Well, we're about to do it again, aren't we? Because on the site where we've been, experimenting with this rewilding, sort of recreating rewilding approach, really, the soil is really compacted. It's a woodland area that has been used by so many groups for so long. The floor is completely bare and very compacted. Yeah, so we're about to do the whole cycle again of rooting. I always thought it was rootling. Rooting like boars, and then we'll do the spreading of seed again. We're going to go and do a bit of beaver coppicing actually after this webinar, aren't we, Dylan?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm really excited to do it again. I'm really excited to think of the ways that we can sort of imaginatively engage some different groups with it, how to really bring to life that idea of being a boar, yeah, I mean, the thing that I've really enjoyed actually is about doing all of the creatures, not just doing one, but it's the combination of the beaver, the boar, the wolves that I think has really brought it to life for people. And actually, interestingly, that I think will probably pay dividends in terms of the woodland area sort of coming back to life a bit more.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, that's a good point. That has been really nice, and that's sort of added detail to the storytelling aspect of this project, hasn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Rooting. Sorry, James.
Sorry that you finished. I was saying I had a few random reflections. If you got time for some left field questions,
go for it.
Well, one was, have you experimented with having people do something that they might want to keep doing anyway, that's kind of like the action of a wild boar? And the only thing I could think of is if you're looking for worms because you're a fisherman or a fisher, you could conceivably be digging for worms, just as one random example. So that was one thought. What could people be doing kind of fairly regularly because they would do it somewhere else or in another way anyway? A bit like your dog walking insight as well. And then the other thought was, it's very sensory. Like I had an experience of working with a kinship workshop, and they're two dancers who do really interesting work. One of the things they get you to do is get quite close to the earth, like a wild boar, like moving around through the forest on all fours, but quite low down. And just the experience of moving around like that, the amount of scent that you get, especially as the earth's warming up, the smells are amazing. And yeah, I just wondered whether there was something in that as well for getting people to imagine and act like wild boars. I can't think what the benefits might be of doing that, how you'd sell that to someone, but it does give you a whole different dimension to a woodland area. The smells are totally different that close to the ground, as I'm sure you've noticed.
Yeah, they're really good points, James. I think that encouraging fishermen to root or rootle around like wild boars is a wonderful idea, and I think that we should be looking for those kind of opportunities because it's relatable for people in the lives that they're leading and the things that they're doing. And obviously, the other one is gardeners as well. I think we're all very used to seeing borders where we've effectively kind of taken the patchwork element out of the rootling concept, haven't we? Because with the boars, they're literally it's like a chessboard, really, where your dark squares are grass and your white squares are the bare earth. So to sort of find ways, could that be done in a way that was more garden friendly? What might that mosaic look like you know, that still maintains the essence of a formal garden even, but actually sort of adds this kind of different, you know, different texture and different opportunities for wild species to kind of, you know, make it their home. So yeah, I think kind of exploring that with all of these concepts is a really important point. And in terms of kind of getting people to think and feel like these animals, I think that's also it's a very powerful way of learning. And we haven't tried it so much with the boars. It's something that we did much more when we built the beaver lodge last summer, and we really got people to kind of think and you know, did they have the knowledge and the understanding? Could they represent a beaver in order to be able to take on that activity? And they really enjoyed that. So yeah, thank you for that, James. They're good points. Helen, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, Jessie's just made a really good point in the chat box, which relates to what you were just saying, really, that it would be an idea to combine the sort of rewilding creatures with something like a council of beings, you know, so people can really sort of get under the cover of what that creature's needs would be, you know, and to be able to sort of represent that creature, which we've done a little bit here, not so much with the rewilding stuff, but with the reed beds. It's just another way of turning the way people think about things on its head, you know. So I think that's a great idea. And what Jessie has also said, this is a great idea: 2 guinea pig grazers, 2 wolf dogs, 2 digging tortoises, and 1 wild child.
Absolutely.
And there's a question here from Mary Jo saying, how does this process compare with the results of reintroducing the wild boars to a given area, if that is being done?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer to that question is we can't make that comparison because we haven't got the data, and we haven't, to be honest, we haven't really got the financial resource to really even monitor the work that we've done from a biodiversity perspective. It's quite anecdotal at the moment. I think that's something that would be incredibly valuable to do. It's something that we should do, we should be trying to do, but we'd also really encourage others, perhaps with more resources, to really think about that kind of monitoring aspect. And only by monitoring can we really make that comparison between what we're doing and you know, what's happening with wild boars or pigs that are behaving like boars on rewilding sites across the country. And I think it would be a very valuable exercise. So there's a question mark still there on that one.
Can I just say one more thing from the chat box, which Erica has said that she saw an interesting interaction at NEP with pigs rooting and storks eating the dug up creatures, you know, so it's that whole, you know, ecosystem approach, isn't it?
It's a whole other dynamic, isn't it, that becomes possible because this world that becomes kind of sealed, really, you know, is suddenly opened up again. And there are, you know, and there are like as with so many things in nature, there are then suddenly multiple benefits to the fact that that's happening. Wonderful, thank you everyone, that's absolutely great. So I think we'll move on, if that's okay, to our second project. Let me just share presentation once more. Okay. Can everybody see that? All good. Okay, so project number 2 is how to create a wild boar wallow, or, you know, a small pond, basically a small, possibly ephemeral, you know, pond which won't last all year long, won't last all through the summer, but has some wonderful nature benefits in the early part of the summer and in the spring. So pigs, as we all know, love to wallow. They love to spend their time in mud. But there are some kind of like really important reasons for that, for these animals. So wild boars and all of the pig family, they lack functional sweat glands. So they use wallowing as a means to kind of regulate their temperature, really, to keep them cool in hot conditions. It also probably helps them to remove parasites, and it protects their sensitive skin from the sun's rays. Part of the reason why whenever you see pigs outdoors, they always have those those kind of metal protected houses, don't they? So there's always somewhere to shelter from the sun. So that's why they're in it. They're constantly looking for places to wallow, and they're constantly looking for places where they can kind of like basically dig out shallow spaces, which could then fill up with water. So why would we then kind of go on and try to mimic those wild boar wallows? Well, first of all, for a whole bunch of amphibians and invertebrates, which the young of which would really struggle in permanent pools which have fish in, for example, any pool that dries out through the summer cannot retain fish. And because it's temporary, it's fantastic for a lot of those particular groups of animals. So, by having more boar wallows in the landscape, potentially increasing biodiversity, providing opportunities for species which might not do so well in other water bodies that are nearby, and basically creating kind of mini wetlands. There are also kind of hydrological benefits as well. So more kind of water retained in the landscape, that's reduced runoff, which is good from kind of flood mitigation perspective, and of course potentially aids groundwater recharge. So the longer that water's held in the landscape and it seeps into the water table slowly, then it keeps the water table higher, and that's good for nature and good for us. So there's some real benefits there potentially. Where might we create our wild boar wallows? Well, we could look at kind of low-lying areas, areas that are already kind of retaining water or moist, or have a lot of moisture, open spaces and sunny spots, which would be good for kind of amphibians to breed, and ephemeral pool plants to grow, for example, like water starwort, which can exist inside, in and out of water. And then thinking about kind of biodiversity potential, really. So targeting areas that maybe have limited water features, or thinking about how we might kind of maximize the ecological impact. Then there's the kind of design of the wallow. Over to you guys on that one. I mean, I think, this is something we really need to explore more. But basically, we want to create really small pools, maybe 1 to 2 meters in diameter, thinking about them being kind of just wild looking, so irregular in shape, very shallow depressions, easy for things to get in and out, also less of a kind of risk to humans. So if anyone kind of wandered into one, it would be very smooth, no one's going to trip up or hurt themselves. And then ensuring that the pool itself is no deeper than kind of 30 to 50 centimeters at its deepest, just to prevent it drying out too quickly, as the summer progresses, but remaining safe for wildlife. Thinking about kind of what tools we would use, kind of similar to the previous discussion, so shovels and spades to dig, digging whatever we need, mattocks, whatever we need to dig a small depression with gentle slope. Waterproofing, these are very small water bodies, so let's try and avoid using plastic liners. I mean, then if you're on clay soils, there'll be areas where just the clay will hold water for a period of time, if not throughout the year. But I think this is an area where we could really experiment as well, actually. So thinking about what combination of natural materials might actually help to retain water. So a combination of natural materials and compression. For example, we know that with bison, they also like to wallow, and in North America there are wallowing pools where years and years of bison skin and bison fur mixed in with the soil in these wallows has actually helped to waterproof the wallows. So the bison themselves are literally, kind of creating this waterproof layer. Here in Neolithic times, it's believed that people used a very clever combination of a layer of clay and then a layer of straw, and then another layer of clay to waterproof human-made ponds. And the straw in the middle layer helped to maintain the moisture content, the moisture level, because the biggest risk of clay-lined ponds is that they dry out and crack in the summer. So the straw layer helped to keep them moist during those dry spells. I mean, it's very clever stuff. I feel like we could definitely explore more with the sort of natural materials that we could use to create these ephemeral or boar ponds. But that would be a great one to discuss. However, we might want to help them along a bit, particularly if we see that they've got, for example, frog spawn or newt spawn, and we don't want them to dry out too early. So perhaps thinking about having a water collection system so that we can top them up in the early part of the summer. We could also improve the habitat around them. So we could think about, I don't know, introducing some native wetland species to the ponds. We could add log or stone features. So when those froglets finally leave, they've got somewhere sheltered to go to. And again, thinking about the kind of rainwater collection side of things if we wanted to go down that route. And then the really big one on all of these, of course, is like engaging the community. So getting people out there digging these things, then doing kind of seasonal checks, seeing what's happening, what nature is coming to these sites. Maybe doing a little bit of vegetation control just to keep them open. So the birds can come down and drink, for example, during the hotter part of the summer. With climate change now and these kind of extreme weather moments where insects and birds really need, and mammals as well, need to find these water spots. These things are going to become increasingly important in the landscape. And then just, the whole surveying discussion that we just had, recording sightings of things, seeing whether it's made a difference to the number of species on the site. And that, it is as simple as that, really. Be good to have a chat about that. Before we do so, I just wanted to kind of highlight some things that we'll do after this webinar. We're going to share some information with you. We'll share with you a copy of this video. Please share it amongst colleagues. We have the 2 help sheets for the wild boar wallows and for rooting or rootling as well to share with you. We also have help sheets on wolf, behaving like a wolf, and behaving like a beaver, so you can see those. They're free to download. And Helen and I are starting to talk about putting together a kind of community rewilding conference. So it'd be great to get your thoughts and feedback on that, whether you think that would be useful, what kind of things that you would like to see happen. So we'll open this up for questions and see how we do for time. We may talk about another project, but we may not. I'll stop presenting. Welcoming your thoughts on this one. Something coming from Catherine, is it, Helen?
Oh, I think this is more about the earlier question about the baseline data.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, this is slightly tangential. We use ephemeral ponds. I mean, the railway land is an urban nature reserve, so it sees a lot of footfall, and we do sometimes have a bit of a struggle on our hands in terms of people staying to the paths and not opening up new paths. So we sometimes use ephemeral ponds as a sort of form of biofencing. Essentially, if you dig a big muddy hole, people don't want to walk that way anymore. So it's a different sort of use.
That's interesting, but with the same nature benefits potentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic.
Audrey has said it'd be great to have the conference with a chance to have a go at some of the activities too. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Audrey. That's something we've discussed, isn't it, Helen? Actually, just really making it a kind of opportunity for people to see all of these things in action, to participate, to ask questions, very much like we have on this webinar, but in a much more hands-on way, to think about some of the things that James touched on earlier, which I think are really good points to that. How might we really get these out into the community? How might fishermen or other fisher folks or other other people kind of like engage with these things because they're a natural part of the work or the fun that they're already having out there, out in the landscape.
Jesse's also made the point that it'd be good to have a program where people can, a sort of community rewilding program, so that people, I think this can help out at different sites, some of the sites where there are fewer volunteers, and then to have a sort of end of season celebration.
Yeah, I think that's nice. I mean, when we were talking earlier, I couldn't help but think about the kind of, like a boar army, really. It'd be wonderful if there were a group of people who just went around the landscape kind of doing rootling in the absence of these fantastic animals, of course, which I personally think should be back, back where they belong. But even if they were, we couldn't get them into every space. And it would be amazing to have volunteer groups who were just doing this and then doing the monitoring as a part of the whole process. So there's plenty to be getting on with, no matter what the season, and telling that and doing the storytelling side of it as well. I think that could be very interesting to explore.
Catherine here. This is from Alistry in Derby. The ephemeral ponds have appeared in Alistry are full of dogs. And then conversations about whether to intervene or not because of the flea and tick treatment. And they're looking to create a research project to monitor the impact.
That's great. Who is that, Helen?
Catherine from Alistry.
Catherine, do you feel confident to speak to us, Catherine? It'd be great to hear a little bit more if you can. If you're able to. Okay. She can't. No problem. Another time. That sounds very interesting. Yeah, and we've talked about multiple benefits, haven't we, of doing these activities, but there are also multiple challenges. Clearly, there are multiple challenges, particularly on sites that are heavily used by people. And it's the double-edged sword of the fact that we want people to engage with these projects, but like every other animal in our ecosystem, there is an impact. And I think the webinar we had about wolves, the first webinar, we talked about how, is there a way of sort of rethinking the way that dogs and dog walkers might roam through a landscape? So there are intensive, we encourage areas of intensivity, and we encourage areas where there's space for other wildlife. And I think we really need to go back and test some of those concepts, because they have such a knock-on impact on so many other projects that we want to work on, such as creating 15 ephemeral pools, in a location. And if they're all full of pesticides, then it's a bit of a waste of time. But if 3 of them are, maybe that's something that we can take on the chin, and it's worth it. So there's definitely some work to be done there, and I think it's why we're having these conversations with you all, and why we need to keep doing so, next year and the year after, so that people can feedback their thought, what's working and what isn't, and we can keep honing these concepts till they really work for people and nature. Any other comments? Please add things to the chat as well if you prefer not to speak. Be good to hear any other thoughts about a rewilding conference, what you'd like to get from it, what would make you go to one. Yeah, that would be very, very helpful for Helen and I as well in our conversations coming up. Okay, well, we have a little bit of time, so we'll bring you back to our presentation. Okay, so a bonus track, an unexpected bonus track. I thought we'd talk to you about, well, to be honest, the thing that started this whole craziness off. And that was how to build a white stork nest. So this is the first project that Helen and I ran together on a nature reserve, and it worked so well and people enjoyed it so much that it made us kind of bang our heads together and think, what else could we do? So I thought very briefly I would kind of share this particular project with you as well, because it's a fun one, and actually I haven't really seen it being replicated very much, apart from by storks themselves, of course, which are returning to a few sites across the UK now, which is such good news. So first thing to say is that I think it's quite easy to get people excited about this topic of white stork nests, because they are amazing. You know, they're just incredible things. You know, they are one of the largest nests of any bird, not just in UK or Europe, but in the whole world. They can be a ton in weight. I mean, that is a lot of weight for a chimney stack or a tree to support. You know, they grow and grow and grow. You know, a pair of storks will return again and again and again. There's a white stork nest in the Czech Republic, which is at least 100 years old, definitely. So that, you know, they're constantly evolving habitats in their own right. They are brilliant for so many other species, which is why we like the idea of replicating them. However, interestingly, as they get older, their value for other wildlife actually does reduce. So as they get older and they get heavier, they start to compact down, and so there are less gaps and less holes between twigs for other things to nest. So they kind of have they have a moment where they are at their maximum value for other wildlife, and then they kind of dip away. But nevertheless, they are, you know, in their own, they're absolutely incredible things. Let's have a look at why. So they create shelter and potentially food for a whole bunch of other animals. First of all, we look at mammals. So red squirrels nest in them in Europe. Rodents will rest in them. Mice and rats have been known to nest in white stork nests. They are incredibly valuable for invertebrates, things like wasps, ants, beetles. Butterflies will overwinter in them, peacocks, for example. Over 34 species of mite have been found in a single white stork nest. That's the stork's presence has probably helped with that, but it just goes to show. They are really amazing sparrow refuges or sparrow nesting sites for both house sparrows and tree sparrows. They're really important on continental Europe. Both of those species have declined dramatically in the UK, so providing them with more nesting resources, never a bad thing. And then finally, and I personally, this is my favorite, the storks, the way they build the nest is they first of all create this, you know, twig-lined, incredible structure. They then bring in mud, and they also use lots of different species of plants to kind of line the inside of the nest. Now, over 100 different species of plants have been recorded inside a white stork's nest. And when you think about how high the nests are, the potential for those seeds to be dispersed widely across the landscape, because they've been placed in this seed hopper, basically, this white stork made seed hopper, has been multiplied. So it's brilliant for plants, brilliant for seed dispersion, lots of different species. So, you know, what would happen if we kind of replicate that? That is a lot of nature benefits. So we ran a project 3 years ago where we thought we'll build our own white stork nest. We got lots and lots of sticks. A typical stick that a white stork would like to carry is about the same thickness as your thumb. It's not an exact science, but it gives you a kind of guide. So we cut up lots of sticks, various lengths, put them in a big pile, got some mud, got some leaves, and just said to people, here you go, here's all the materials, this is what a nest looks like, make a nest. And away they did. There were some very interesting discussions around engineering. I remember there was one gentleman in particular who was very particular about how the nest should be engineered, which was all part of the kind of fascinating fun of building it. And they came up with this fantastic nest. We put it on a tray so that we could move it to the site that we wanted to be able to place the nest at in situ. And then finally, to finish off with, we actually had an artist make out of kind of biodegradable materials a white stalk to sit on the nest, 2 white stalks actually, to actually sit in the nest, so that the nest was both a kind of a habitat, but also a piece of art for people to enjoy and to kind of remark upon. But there's also something else which is really important, and that is that white storks will only nest in places where there are other white storks. So for the 400 years that we didn't have white storks, there were plenty of white storks flying over the UK. They didn't see any other birds sitting on nests, so they carried on. And in fact, the very first white stork pair to breed again in the UK at NEP, the NEP Rewilding project in West Sussex, one of those birds was a captive bred bird, but the other one was a wild bird. So it proves the point really that a wild bird is just flying over. Oh, there's another stork. I'll come down. I'll have a look. So although this hasn't been proven, I have a theory that if we actually created a whole bunch of white stork nests and put mock white storks in them, we would massively increase our chances of actually bringing wild white storks to a specific location. Might not work, but hey, what have you got to lose, really? We're trying. So that's what we did, and it was a huge amount of fun. That nest, you can see on the left-hand image here, we put it into a rebed site on the nature reserve. We didn't really have a high up position that we could place it, so we've just put it on kind of wooden poles, really, about 1 meter above the ground. And it's 3 years old now, and I think it's still holding pretty well. So a very, very simple project, really. And quite a few of our rewilding projects just involve a load of sticks, ultimately, because you can build beaver dams, white stork nests, and beaver lodges with effectively a whole bunch of sticks and branches. And what harm could that possibly do? And it can definitely do a whole bunch of good. Helen, do you have any remarks on the white stork project, thinking back?
The white stork project was brilliant fun. What you haven't mentioned is that it was on an island in a reed bed, so we did also have to transport it to the island, which was also great fun. And yeah, it was a massive talking point when it first appeared on the island with this stork in it. There was so much conversation about it, and yeah, it's still there. We've taken the model stork down because it was looking rather sad, but the nest itself it's still there.
Fantastic. I do remember walking past a couple of runners, a couple of joggers, like a few months later, and they were like, "Oh, I'll meet you at the white stork." I thought, oh, great, it's become a landmark. That's always an encouraging sign that people are kind of registering something, so that's nice. Okay, well, we have 5 minutes for the end of the presentation. Does anyone have any other questions? Anything else in the chat? Anything that we can cover off at all? Yeah, very happy to try and do so.
I have another question about the conference, Dylan, if no one else is jumping on camera. Is there something like a community of practice for all the people who are doing community scale or community centered rewilding? Is there something already out there that brings together that group of people who share that passion or concern regularly in some form?
Not that I'm aware of, to be honest. I mean, there's loads of great things happening around rewilding. And there are lots of initiatives, and some of them are someone just mentioned Citizen Zoo, which they are fantastic. There's some great organizations that have that focus. But in terms of kind of bringing together a kind of, a whole cohort of people who sort of share this passion, if there is something, then I'd love to know about it, because I definitely want to kind of join in. But I think everyone in this room is part of that early nascent conversation, is kind of the way I feel about it at the moment. That we may be missing something, you never know. If anyone has a comment or thought or something happening out there that we're not aware of, then please do let us know. Thank you, James. James, are you aware of anything?
No, I'm just aware that they're quite hard to form, so maybe it's no surprise. There's a kind of activation cost, even though when they're up and running, they're really useful. I've been doing some work with coral reef restoration practitioners in that space. It's really hard trying to get regional groups to form, but everyone says how helpful and how useful it is, but it does take a bit of outside effort to get people gathered, semi-frequently on an annual basis, connecting, understanding who's in it, what everyone's doing, where, how we can learn from one another. Just takes a little bit of a push to get over that first hill, I think. But there's lots of great examples from other fields like healthcare practitioners, where it's pretty normal to go to peers, and learn regularly from them rather than paying a consultancy or going to an educational institution or all the things you do, if you've got loads of resources. Yeah, I see Catherine's comment. Yeah, I sort of assumed Rewilding Britain might have a role like that as well. But yeah, ultimately, I think it does seem to come down to the practitioners themselves. Once you've got over that first activation cost, actually seeing themselves as a community of interest and practice.
Oh, that's interesting from Ruth, that there's a Devon Rewilding network that got a little bit of funding from Rewilding Britain. Yeah, I think that's right, and it's great on these webinars. We've someone just messaged from Vermont, which is fantastic. Thank you for making the effort to be part of this, and Italy and Germany, and there are a whole bunch of species and habitats that we don't kind of think about, that all face similar challenges, and in communities, in urban or other locations. It would be wonderful. I'm sure there's a lot we could learn from people who are thinking about this stuff in very different circumstances as well. So lots of potential, I think. Time for one last question or comment. Anything else in the chat?
There's some links to Devon Rewilding Network.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, in that case, with less than a minute to go, I would like to say, I'll let Helen have the last word, but I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone who's supported this project, for everyone who's participated, most importantly, in this series of webinars. I've really enjoyed it. I hope that you've also enjoyed it, and that there's something that you can kind of take away and go out and do practically. I hope we can come back and either meet face to face or through some more online sessions where we get to share more and learn from each other, because I think there's huge potential in what we're doing here, and if we can kind of scale up, I think we can have a real massive benefit for people and also for nature. So thank you. Over to you, Helen.
Well, I would just like to say thank you to you, Dylan, for your crazy rewilding imagination. And just to reiterate, how much fun it's been doing these things, how engaging it has been, and how much the conversations that have gone on around the activities have been really, really valuable. It's felt like there's been quite a shift in the way some people are thinking about things. So that's been great.
We need that. Thank you so much, Helen. Thanks to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you again.
Thank you. Thanks very much.